first of all, I want to start at the beginning. Sort of, what age were you when you said, like, I'm going to be an artist?
Probably about 40. Because really, before that, I was more of a designer, model maker type person, really. So it's just been a very slow, gradual thing. But I think in my heart, I've always wanted to be an artist, but I never admitted it, kind of thing, to myself. So these days, I try and be as much of an artist as I can. But I'm still not like a hardcore fine artist, really.
So what is an artist in your mind then?
A pure artist is someone who just works for themselves and bugger the consequences, kind of thing, I think. You know, if you're doing jobs for people, of course you're an artist to a degree, but you're just not a fully self-contained, self-motivated, self-inspired person. Is that any sort of explanation?
Yeah. So how did you become that artist then?
It's something like, basically, my family were all artists of one sort or another. And I did graphic design at college, so an applied practical thing I did, because I thought I better to earn a living and all the rest of it. And I'm probably, no regrets about that. But then I've just done job after job after job, but becoming more and more myself with those jobs, I think, I hope. Less and less doing a job to satisfy someone else, more and more having my own thing that then people come to me for. That was in my 40s, that sort of happened. And now, or 30s, and now I have my own direction, my own things I want to do, where other people aren't asking me to do that. A friend of mine has a catchphrase that said something like, art is the thing that nobody asked you to do. Babak says, art is the thing that nobody asked you to do, which is, nice.
Yeah, I like that. So you did graphics at college?
Yes.
Where did you learn your craft then, like drawing and model making and sculpture? I've never sort of formally been taught those things, you might say. I mean, my dad was an artist, and my family, like I said, so there was always art around. But in terms of people sitting down and saying, draw like you can draw like this, or you sculpt like this, or you can use this medium or that medium or stuff, I've never exactly had that. Because at college I was doing graphic design, so they were more saying things like, what ideas have you got for this project, and a tiny little bit about layouts and typography and things like that, all of which I was crap at. So it was great to be able to wave bye-bye to all that. But I'm a pretty sceptical about all this sort of being taught stuff anyway, really. Everyone's self-taught, ultimately. If you're interested in drawing, all you've got to do is shed loads of it, and eventually things will start happening. And look at other great artists, and maybe one or two words from someone you admire. But people who seek out too much sort of teaching, I think, are a bit on the wrong foot, I would say. And so what artists were you looking at? Who were your inspirations?
I've always loved self-taught artists, proper, like outsider artists. I don't just mean like in general everyone's self-taught, but I love outsider art, but also just all the classics. You can't go wrong with what I do. If you look at Lucian Freud, Alice Neal, Chantal Joffe, David Hockney, blah 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 blah. They're all there waiting, and there's any number. You could go on and on. All the classics. They're classics for a good reason.
Can you talk a little bit about your process for creating a sculpture or portrait? Is it a bit unusual because you were so self-taught?
I don't want to go on about being self-taught. I'm not. I'm not a self. I'm not. I didn't come to it all naive. You know, I had a big load of art in my background, but I just didn't. I just didn't do fine art or a sculpture course or something like that. So, what was your question?
A little bit about your process of, say, creating a sculpture, so a head, or painting a head or something.
So really the thing is that you just, a subject jumps out that is going to be like your ears. I want to paint them as soon as I see them. And this goes for celebs or friends or people who message me. So it's really the subject is the thing. So if I get something that I'm intrigued by in the subject, then I'm wanting to paint them or sculpt them or whatever I do, and I use different mediums depending on what it's for, whether it's just an ephemeral thing or whether I want it to last, whether I might like to sell it or whether I think there's no chance of selling it but I want to do it anyway. So they're just choices in mediums, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask something about. I was really interested in your use of plasticine, because I think a lot of artists have this idea of permanence or like mortality through art, but yours is so. I mean, plasticine it's not gonna last long.
No,
So
exactly. It's an ephemeral thing. Well, to a degree, it's laziness, because it's just such simple, easy stuff to use with no fussing around with anything technical at all. So that's absolutely great about it. It's also, an old art teacher of mine said, a work of art is only a work of art once it's sold. Up until that point, it's a storage problem. And I mean, it's a jokey thing to say, but there's a grain of truth in it, at least, because with sculptures anyway, it's quite possible to end up with like shelves of depressing sculptures that nobody wants. And with plasticine, you know, you've always got the excuse, well, it's just fallen apart. Nobody wanted it, well, and so what? You know, so it's quick, it's easy, and you just squash it up and make something else out of it. And there's so much brilliant art in the world. Who needs yet more stuff? I mean, I do drawings, but at least they sit flat in a drawer or go on someone's wall. But sculptures can be quite bulky, annoying things. So I don't mind if they just fall apart, really. As long as I've got a nice photo of them and they've amused someone, that's good for me.
You said that you pick your subjects based on something that's interesting about them. Where do you find your faces? Where do you find the subjects?
Basically, the internet. So, you know, you only have to look at the BBC website and you'll see some celeb that is funny looking. Or people message me on Instagram, non-celeb, like ordinary people, so to speak, who are curious to have their portrait done, or people commission me, like especially for their birthday or something like that. So I've, you know, I have an endless supply of lovely subjects. I could, you know, never run out.
So it's not important for you to like know your sitters or have a relationship with the sitters beforehand?
Well, that's it's a good question. It's much more difficult to sculpt people or draw people I know, that's for sure, because I know what they really look like. Whereas if someone just turns up and I paint them or draw them, I don't really know what they look like. So I'm more easily satisfied. You know, I think, oh, that'll do. That's quite like them, isn't it? That'll do. Whereas if it's a mate, it'll be like, oh, it's not really quite right. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. You talked a little bit about, but I wanted to know, what are you looking for in a face? Like when I walked in, like what jumped out? Like?
Well, I don't want to go on and on about your ears.
But in anybody's face, like what makes you look at?
It's not really so much about. I mean, sometimes a really bland-looking person, I can end up doing a good portrait of. It's much more the vibe of the person. If I think the person is with me, they want to be here, they're giving themselves to me for an hour. You know, it's that's the important thing. If someone's fidgety, you feel that they're terribly self-conscious or embarrassed, or they'd rather be doing something else, or they're very busy, or anything like that, it's very difficult to do. You have to feel there's a kind person who's giving themselves to me. They're at my mercy for an hour, and I'll do my best. That's the sort of important thing, really, because sometimes a fantastic looking model, like a fashion model, can walk through the door, and if the vibe isn't right, I'll end up just doing a crappy portrait and feel really disappointed. And how could I waste waste this opportunity of drawing someone who looks fantastic? But I've just made a mess of it because I couldn't quite sort of get on. And there's also quite a lot of luck in the whole thing. It's not like I know how a portrait's going to turn out in advance. I just follow my nose. I just start, and everything is a hunch and a guess if I do that, and a balancing out, like that's a bit too much there, so I need to sort of shuffle this around over here, and trying to keep the whole thing fresh. All those things go into it, and it's just a process. And in the end, this thing comes out, but it's not like it was preordained. It's just happened bit by bit, and it might be really nothing like what I meant to do. So there's room for all sorts of interpretations of. It's been done a million times in a million ways. A portrait is probably the most oldest form of art you could think of, but for good reason. It's the most interesting, the most adaptable. I feel like I'm 53 now, but I could have another 10 lifetimes trying to get to grips with portraits, of all sorts. There's endless possibilities with it always, which is a lovely feeling, and a bit of a daunting feeling.
Yeah, so you say that you, again, I don't know if this is the right word, but exaggerate the features to make them more interesting. So are you doing the pieces for you, or do you keep an audience in mind, or are they for the sitter, or...?
It's a balance, but that's a very good key sort of question. I mean, I think you always, as an artist, you've always got to keep yourself number one. I've got to amuse, challenge myself, interest myself. That's the number one. But I can't say that it doesn't make any difference what other people think of my work, or what the sitter thinks of my work. Both things are key as well. And sometimes it's, people don't always like their portrait at all. It can be quite awkward.
There's been times where people have been offended?
Yeah, of course. So it's difficult. But I've got to do my job.
Yeah.
And not be, as soon as you're too affected. Do you know the artist Maggie Hamblin?
Yeah, of course.
So she's great. And I saw her give a talk, and at the end she's very, very intimidating. And at the end of the talk, I put my hand up and said, I'm always nervous about what the sitter thinks of my drawing. What can I do about this? And she said, my advice to you, young man, is to take absolutely no notice whatsoever of what the sitter thinks. Otherwise, you will be inhibited. So, that's what you have to do.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the process of your sitters, like how that works? I'm always kind of interested in the relationship between...
Well, if it's, say, just like what I do 2 or 3 times a week, which is or a couple of people come to my home and I draw them, then at the moment I'm just doing commissions, basically because I fucked my arm through too much drawing. So I've got a bad wrist, bad elbow and bad shoulder. It sounds ridiculous that you could ever do that with drawing, but I get these pastels and I go quite hard with them. And if you do that for years, every other day or even every day, I was doing them for a bit, eventually something goes seriously wrong. So I'm doing far less now, and they're usually commissions. So people will come to me as a couple or singly and say maybe it's their anniversary or they just fancied it or it's their birthday or whatever, or it's a present for someone. And I'll just get to know them a little bit and then sit them down and draw them the best I can with sort of crayons, really. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's exhausting, and I have to really concentrate. And most of the time, I'm trying to get people to stop talking. That's the main problem. People just love to chat, and I can't really talk and draw at the same time.
I know you're quite scrupulous about what pieces work and what don't. I think I read that somewhere, and I just wanted to know, like, what for you determines that piece is a failure or success.
That's almost impossible to say. It's just a intuitive sort of reaction to things. I mean, you're always going to have failures and successes. It's quite unpredictable. I mean, I like say I'm drawing someone from photos, like Ronaldo. I've been doing these watercolours of Ronaldo, and I've probably done about 20 or 30. And what I normally do is do them over a day or two or something, and then put them away in a drawer, and then come back to them a week later, and then you can very quickly go, yes, no pile, yes pile, yes pile, no pile, no pile, like that. And you can immediately see what has. It's got to have a feeling of the person is the key thing, because occasionally you can do something that's got a kind that has an aesthetic that you like, but isn't very like the person. That I'll let through occasionally, but there's an awful lot of chucking stuff away that just doesn't work, and it's fairly fluky when things work or not.
So we talked a little bit about before this about like Instagram and stuff.
Yeah.
It's obviously massively important for you to reach an audience, and you said like that's how people reach out for sitters and stuff.
Yeah.
I wonder how much that Instagram as a tool sort of informs your art. Has that changed since Instagram's become a thing?
Basically, I would happily say I'm very grateful to Instagram. I know everyone slags off all these social media all the time. Fair enough, I can understand why, and I do as well in a way, but actually I'm very, very grateful because I don't have a gallery. I don't have the white cube knocking at the door at all. So I really, any attention or work I get is through Instagram. So I mean, it's been it's enabled me to do what I want, really. So I'm very grateful to it. But if you mean in terms of like the problem of working for Instagram, I was in a shop the other day and there was a guy behind the counter, and he said he's going off Instagram. They were studenty sort of age, and the other one said, "Oh, why is that?" And he said, "Because I realised that I'm making my work for Instagram." So of course that's the problem. You get likes, you think, that's good, I'll do some more of that. But it's same as it ever was. Artists throughout history have had galleries that said, last year's show was very successful, let's have some more of them. Or you get a patron or someone who's bought your work and said, I love those ones, I'm not so keen on these, can you go back to do some more of those? So it's only the same. The problem with it is that it's so immediate and so sort of transitory and so fickle. So I feel quite glad that I was into my 40s before Instagram came along and before I started using it. So I was quite solid in a way as a person and a artist, relatively. But I think it must be difficult as a young artist to have that pressure immediately, or even when you're a teenager, when you're doing your O levels practically, it must be very difficult to negotiate it. So you've got got to maintain a solid core inside yourself that isn't completely swayed by what is popular, what is flavour of the month. That's always been the case for artists, to fight against that little personal struggle.
I guess it's just a bit more immediate now.
Immediate and hard to escape.
Yeah, because it's in your pocket at all times.
Exactly, it's with you. It's like a devil on your shoulder saying, "More of that, please. More of this, please."
So to wrap it up, what's on your mind going forward, projects-wise, or even just like process-wise?
Well, the interesting thing for me is my bad arm. So I'm forced to try different medium, which is actually really good. So I'm doing less pastels and more painting. So it's more, I'm trying to do watercolours, which is really tricky. But then I'm just starting to use acrylics, which I think possibly might be more up my street for some reason. So it's really lovely trying these new mediums and jumping around a bit. That's the next thing for me.